Let's see the basic structure of XAML elements when working with such files. This markup language for declaring graphical interfaces will surely be very familiar to you if you have worked with HTML or XML files. And the syntax is very similar to that type of formats, since first we must specify the symbols less than and greater than to surround each of the elements, as we see with each of these cases. Secondly, each time we define an opening tag, we must specify a closing tag. As in this specific case, we have the opening scroll view, and at the end we have this closing element that is defined in this way. If we look at each of these elements, each of them specifies an opening element and also specifies a closing element. Although in this specific case, for example, we are not declaring a closing tag as such for this label, but we are specifying it from this pair of symbols that we are seeing on the screen. Another thing that is also important for you to know are the properties. This is an element that is part of the .NET Maui framework, but also each of these elements has a set of properties that you can modify to assign a certain value. Each of these elements that we're looking at here are different properties that you can modify to affect the visual appearance of this specific control. And these are called property attributes. We have a second type of definition for these attributes, and this form is, for example, if we wanted to specify a text color for this label element, we could do it through a property called text color. Here we could select a color and modify the visual appearance. We also have a second way to define these properties, and this format is known as elements of a property. And we have to do this by first setting a closing tag, as is the case we are seeing on the screen. We are closing or creating a label for this label element, and then we access directly to the property of that control. For example, if we wanted to modify the color of the text, we would have to do it this way. We define a pair of labels, an opening and a closing one, and we specify the value. For example, an aqua value for the text color. We see that the green line that indicated that we had some kind of error has disappeared, and we are already setting a text color for this label element. This is the second way to define different values for a property. We could think that it is simpler to define it this way, instead of creating this pair of labels for each of the properties that we would like to modify. And the truth is that it is. This format is simpler. However, there are going to be times when the value that we have to specify for a property is a bit complex. So in those cases, we have to create this syntax that we see here to define or assign a more complex object as part of that property. Finally, let's talk a little bit about the hierarchy of elements in a XAML file. You can appreciate that Visual Studio does a great job formatting each of the elements that are part of this XAML file. It even shows us here some lines that are telling us what is the opening tag, and also through the line we can quickly get to the closing tag, and this forms a hierarchy between the different elements. For example, if we collapse this content page element, look how it looks like the file has been left without content. But if we expand this node again, we see again all the content. Then, as part of the visual hierarchy, this tag that we see here encloses each of these elements that are part of this content page. We see here the closing tag, and this happens exactly with each of the elements. We see that the content page contains this scroll view element. We can see that this scroll view element contains this vertical stack layout element, and so on. This then tells us about the hierarchy as part of the document. Once we know about the basic syntax of XAML files, we are ready to learn about pages in .NET Maui.